Hey everybody, it is Coach Malcolm here today, and today I'm going to be doing another openings video. I decided, I did an openings video recently on Joko Piano, so today I wanted to do an openings video for Black, and the opening we're going to be covering today, which I'm sure you've already seen from the title, is the Exchange French. So the Exchange French is a line in the French that you typically don't see at, I would say, once you get to the higher levels of chess, because at the beginning of the game, if we turn on the engine at the very beginning of the game, white has a very, very, very slight advantage. Not that white wins every game, of course. We know that's not true. White has a very slight advantage, and this is seen in a lot of openings. White sometimes gets a more open attacking position. The Exchange French, as we'll look at, is not played as much as the higher levels, I believe, because it equalizes pretty quickly for Black and makes it a much easier position to play for Black, less cramped than some of the other styles. Of course, there are completely open, attacking, great openings for Black. That's not what I am. I'm not trying to disprove that. But today I wanted to look at a line in the Exchange French because I'm going to show you guys in a second. But because of how open it is as a line, and just honestly just the range of options that you can develop your pieces, sometimes, that is a good thing that you have a lot of options to develop your pieces. But it can be tricky sometimes figuring out what structure is going to work best. And I have used this. Opening when I played the French. It was very effective. It got me a lot of good attacks. And I just wanted to share it with you guys. Of course, there are other lines. This is one that particularly worked well for me. So, if you don't know what the Exchange French is, well, first of all, the French is e6, d5 against e4. Sometimes people will play the two knights, which is not the Exchange French, obviously. d5 will still occur. And then knight c3. And now there's a whole range of different ideas that can happen here. Sometimes Black will take on e4. Sometimes Black will take on knight f6. d4 is sometimes played as well. There's just a lot that happens here. Today, we're going to be looking at, let me delete this. We're going to be looking at this move d4, which is, I'm not sure if it's more common than the two knights, but d4 is a very, very common move. d5 is still played, and the Exchange French is an exchange of pawns. So e takes d5, e takes d5, and now obviously the position is, the same on both sides. We've both got a pawn in the center on the d file. The e pawn is gone. And it allows for easy development. Now you can just see this bishop has all these different squares it can go to. This bishop has all these different squares it can go to, as long as it's guarded on g4, right? The knight has different options here. This knight has different options. The point is, there's not a pawn on e6. This bishop is open. There's not a pawn on d6 in some openings. Our bishops, even if it could fianchetto if they want to. So the point is, we're going to give a little structure to this opening. All right? So a lot of times your opponents will just develop normally, something like knight f3. And the line that I like to play is where we develop bishop d6. And first of all, I just want to show the structure that we are going to get, sort of how our pieces are going to be arranged. Let's say our opponents just continued pretty normally, right? Bishop e2 is a pretty normal move, or we can say bishop d3 is fine. We're going to play knight e7, right? Our knight's going to come to guard d5, which is going to be kind of important, especially if our opponents play something like knight c3 here. We're going to want to guard that d5 square, but bishop d3, knight e7, let's say knight c3. Now we can play bishop g4. We get ourselves a nice pin. If our opponents play bishop g5, we'll play f6. And f6 should indicate to you we're not trying to castle kingside. That's not really our main idea in this line. We're going to play knight c6, develop another piece. These knights are well connected, pointing at the center. This knight has the option to go to f5, which we're going to look at more deeply. We're going to play queen d7 now, developing our queen, guarding this bishop, helping out a little bit. Let's just say this bishop retreats. We castle queenside, and what is our main idea? We are going to be attacking. We are going to be doing a g5, h5, depending on the order. Sometimes it changes. Sometimes we'll take on f3, get a g4 in there. Our bishop's pointing at the king. Our other bishop is pointing at the king. Our queen is. Our knight's coming into f5 in many cases to come attack. You do have to definitely be aware of white attacking you as well. That's how it works when you do opposite side castling, of course. If you've played a lot of opposite side castling games, this tends to be how it goes. A similar line would be the Yugoslav attack. I believe that's the name in the Sicilian, where it looks relatively similar to this. That's when Black fianchettos their bishop. White has the bishop on e3, the queen on d2. They castle queenside, Black castles kingside. Black launches an attack, White launches an attack. That's just how opposite side castling games go. Oftentimes you will play a king b8 move for a number of reasons. This bishop f5 skewer, not in this position, of course, because there's a lot of factors. We have our knight, our queen, our bishop all guarding f5. But sometimes it's nice to play king f8 to guard a7, to sort of put your king centralized in front of these pawns, especially if they start launching an attack. And just to get this out of the way for the future, or especially if you lose these pieces or they have to, move away. Sometimes this knight will come and take on g3. We're going to look at a game very shortly in which that occurs. If this knight moves out, another idea, I'm just going to sort of play moves that aren't good for white here, just to sort of explain a way of defending, before they might start an attack like this. If our knight needs to, after it is attacked, a good idea is to play knight e7. Again, just playing random moves for white. And knight c8 can be a good way to defend a7 in the case of sometimes this queen will get to a4 if c3 is played instead of knight c3. It's a good defending piece. And, you have to work through it. You have to do a little calculating. You have to defend yourself, and you're also mounting an attack on black. So let me stop talking, and, well, I'm going to continue talking, but let me stop, making random moves, and let us look at a real game. I believe this game was played at the Girls World Junior Championship. So yeah, these are the two players. Right now, this was round 3 of the event. It's a pretty interesting game. I thought, why don't we look through it? It's the exchange French, and it's the line that I'm talking about. So e4, e6, d4, d5, of course, pawn takes, knight to f3, bishop g4. So they played a bit of a different order, not a problem. Bishop d3, bishop d6, castles, knight e7, like we talked about, right, guarding d5. This knight's going to come to f5 later, we'll see. Bishop to g5. They delay f6 for a bit, not really a problem. Knight c6, queen d7, castles, and now they play f6. Because this bishop, you don't want to be in a sort of pin like this. You're going to get a tempo on the bishop anyways. Kick that bishop out, and it's usually going to head back to g3 if it comes to g5. I've seen some games where people will always play bishop g5. Sometimes in the exchange French, people like to play a bishop e3. They don't like to bring that bishop out to g5 because they just sort of anticipate f6 occurring. So bishop h4, and now we see knight f5, right? So now black is starting to, sorry if there's a little background noise, I'm not sure if you guys can hear it or not. Black is starting to mount an attack, right? And white is, further behind. And just, again, because we have so many pieces attacking the king side, and we don't have to worry about pushing all these pawns if we want, as we will see, because our king is nice and safe over here. All right, so this game, I really like this game because it exercises a lot of the core ideas of this line in the exchange French. So bishop g3, and here black decided to take on g3, which isn't a bad idea. I'm not sure it's necessarily the best move in the position. It may very well be. Another idea here could be to play h5 right away, trying to threaten this h4 push. And it's nice that we still have this pin here. Something else that I want to mention quickly just before I forget is sometimes opponents will forget to play this c3 move in the game. And the reason they played c3 after knight c6, if they play something like knight d2 here, if we don't even need to turn on the engine, I don't know why I'm suggesting this, sorry, is exactly, yes, knight takes d4, and now we have a pin. So that's why white played c3, I forgot to mention that. So if your opponents miss c3, this is a neat trick that you can pull. You're taking advantage of the pin, you're also just piling on the pin, and of course, if, white takes back, we are just going to pick up a queen, and this is going to be a nice game for us to play. Sorry I had to go back for a second like that, but I think that's important. I've had that happen in games. So knight f5, they took on g3 like I was talking about, h takes back, and now in this game, see, how can black launch their attack? I've kind of touched on it already. Pause your videos if you need to, of course, but the move is h5, right? Black, I like this idea. We're going to push to h4, and this knight is still pinned. So you might be thinking, Coach Malcolm, you can't do h4. They're just going to take, and if rook takes, then knight takes back. No, we have this super awesome pin here still in place. White could, if they wanted to, get rid of it with something like bishop e2, but regardless, maybe we'll throw in a g5 and then an h4 to support it anyways. King b8. King b8 is a very, very key move here. So queen c2, this is all about looking at your opponent's threats. Our opponent is threatening, not right now, of course. We still have, we have the bishop guarding f5 and the queen guarding f5. But bishop f5 in this position is becoming increasingly more of a threat. Of course, with the idea of pinning, but just winning this queen on d7 if that bishop were to get to f5, right? So let's just say, for whatever reason, white forgot about this idea. Bishop f5 is deadly here. This is going to be really hard for black to come back from. They're going to be losing their queen. So it's a great idea just to play king b8. Now this idea of bishop f5, while if this bishop gets traded off, is still a threat that can be used. It's still a threat that can be used. It is not as strong, of course, because our queen is just going to move. Maybe she'll head on over to f7. She's allowed to move now because there is no pin. Sorry about the noise. I'm going to shut this window. All right. King b8. Knight h4, right? Trying to get in the way of that h4 push. Not going to work too well. g5. Again, we are pushing these pawns. White is slow with the response here. h4 is much more supported now, and then knight just has to move yet again. So knight f5. Pawn h4. Now, of course, if we just picture if our king was on c8 and we took, now again, we are in a lot of trouble. That king on b8, I think, is just important to note on. So here, black continued. Pawn to h4, trying to open up this file, this bishop. If we got to, also there's just pressure on g3. We've got 2 attackers on g3, only 1 defender. This rook is begging for an open file to do a lot of damage on white's king side. So, knight f1. What's the point of knight f1? Always good to think about your opponent's moves. To guard g3, right? We just talked about 2 attackers on g3. They're going to guard it, especially because it's one of the pawns in front of the king. And especially if you pull the f-pawn in front of the king, that is just more dark squared weaknesses that would open up. So, pawn takes on g3. Pawn takes back. Bishop takes f5 now. Yet again, I will say it so many times, if this king was on c8, this would be horrible for black. And now queen g7. Okay, so not queen f7, but that's because the pawn has been pushed. Queen g7, getting closer to this king, maybe heading on over to h6 later to come into this open file. So, black just has a great attack here. I love black's position. This rook is incredibly happy on the open file. This is what you want for your rooks. This is how you make your rooks, feel joy, be incredibly happy. King f2, white is pretty terrified here, right? They're trying to get out of the way. Sorry, they're trying to get out of the way. G3 is a key weakness in this game. Pawn to g4. I think this move is just trying to maybe put a little pressure, inviting in a queen g5 to take advantage of these dark squares. I think it's important to notice also black has a dark square bishop. White does not. That dark square bishop was traded off when the knight took on g3. So these dark squares, particularly g3, we could say h2 and g1 as well, they are very, very weak, and this is going to serve as a huge problem for white to deal with. So queen to e2, rook h5, looking to double up on this file. Bishop takes g4, rook g5. I'm not sure if white saw this in the game, and it is pretty hard here to guard g4. I guess you could play something like rook g8. We can see what the engine says. It may very well just not be. Yeah, so rook h5 is the best move. It's just not worth it to take on g4. If they want to take g4, we can invite them to do that, and it's because after takes, they played rook g5 exactly. We didn't need to turn the engine on for that. Let me hide the notation. We are just creating more pressure on this g3 square. Now this bishop is attacked twice. There's no reason to spend time playing rook g8 to guard g4 in this position right here. Right, we are happy letting them take that pawn, opening up more weaknesses, guys. Sometimes taking material, I guess we could call this a poison pawn. It's just very problematic. G3 is a weakness. Again, because that is a dark square, and we have our bishop doing a great job on d6. In this position, black decides, I believe, not to take on g3 yet. They do a little moving around with their knight. Maybe they were thinking they were going to come to f5 here, but after queen d3, c5, we'll go a little faster here. Pawn takes, the knight went back to c6. Maybe keeping an eye on this d4 weakness. Keep in mind, this open file is open yet again. These rooks are going to have the time of their lives this game. And the knight moves to e3. Always, like I said, guys, think about your opponent's moves. Knight e3, this g3 pawn is just a sitting duck. First black plays f5, and now that g3 pawn is just easily taken. Rook goes over to f1. The bishop hops on back to c7. Maybe black is considering, I'm not sure how sound this is, but g2 is a weakness, so it kind of ties that bishop down on g2. They're also probably thinking about rerouting to maybe b6, put more pressure on d4, even a5, take advantage of these dark squares in the white king's position. There's so many ideas here for black. Rook goes to d1, rook e1, rook e8. Sorry, like I said, guys, taking advantage of this open file for this rook. Both rooks are very well placed here. Bishop f4, another great square for the bishop, putting this king in check. And this king, we can see, is getting in a lot of trouble, right? This file is covered. The king is in check. we are seeing problems for white here. So in this position, white played king c3. Again, obviously just in a horrible position. Checkmate is coming soon, guys. Spoiler alert. So the queen goes to c7, obviously opening up ideas for discovered attacks against this king. Queen b5. Here, black just decided to double up on the file. I guess just trying to put more pressure on. Once this knight moves and does a discovery, the knight on c2 is vulnerable. Also, just the king is vulnerable because checkmate is quickly approaching. King d3 to get out of the fierce discovery battery that has been set up. And here, black has a super cool move. And after I think 2 moves, white resigned because they were going to get checkmate. So take a second, pause your videos, see if you can find it. Black plays knight to e5. Alright, so pretty weird. This king does not have a lot of squares. Obviously, if the king goes back to e2, I think just queen takes c2 here. If the king went back again to e1, bishop g3, rook f2, queen takes, this is checkmate. If the rook decides to block, queen takes, this is checkmate right away. So white captured back, and here the finishing blow, queen c2, I believe at this point. Okay, they didn't resign yet. First, a6, queen b3, queen c5, and now at this point, white just resigned because the only move is king d3. And next up is queen e3 checkmate. This rook turning out to be super helpful on that c8 square, covering the file. Just a pretty checkmate. This king is on d3. You don't really see that, especially in what you might still consider a middle game. I'm not exactly sure. But I like how in this position, obviously the queen does work, the bishop does work, but also we have our pawn, we have our rook doing a great job. So I mean, the only piece is this rook not involved in the checkmate, and I guess you could say these 3 pawns, depending on whether we consider pawns pieces or not. But this rook, let's not forget, let's not undersell this rook. Did an excellent job earlier on in this game. So yeah, I mean, the reason I wanted to show this game was it's easy to sort of just show, oh, this is how the structure is supposed to be made. It's so much better to show, here's an actual game where someone used this structure, used the exchange French setup that I'm talking about, that I'm explaining, to launch a super good attack. So they advanced their pawn down the side of the board, opened up a lot of squares. Let me move. Oh, this is like a sideline that we're looking at. Opened up a lot of squares, sorry about that, opened up a lot of squares around this king, exposed the king, and then continued to incorporate pieces again and again. Alright, I'm having trouble going through it just because the notation is scrambled up. We just saw the game. Every single piece, I believe, was incorporated in this game. Had a role, a great attack we just saw here. Feel free to try this out in your games if you get the exchange French, if you've had trouble with the exchange French, and let me know how it goes. I look forward to seeing it, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Bye-bye.